Greetings! You're listening to the Department of Defense Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation podcast series part 2, Military Herpetofaunal Project Highlights and Successes. The purpose of this podcast series is to feature the people, projects, and military installations that are conducting exceptional amphibian and reptile conservation, management, and research project on DoD lands. In this episode, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Ridgeway and Dr. Patrick Baker discuss the amphibian acoustic surveys being conducted on the United States Military Academy. We hope you enjoyed the podcast.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lieutenant Colonel Jason Ridgeway. I am an assistant professor of geography at the United States Military Academy, and today I'm talking with
Dr. Patrick Baker. I'm an associate professor of environmental science in the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering at the United States Military Academy.
So, Patrick, can you kind of orient us to the U.S. Army garrison here at West Point?
West Point is the longest continuously occupied post in the United States. The United States Military Academy, where we both work, was founded in 1802, but the fortifications here at West Point started on Constitution Island, and they were established prior to the Declaration of Independence. The main post, where we are, started out as a series of mutually reinforcing forts and redoubts that were designed to defend and secure the only sea level route through the mountains. Most activity here during the first 150 years of West Point's existence was focused on the Hudson River. In the 1940s, U.S. garrison West Point rapidly expanded when land was consolidated from purchases of private properties to form the West Point Military Reservation. Our natural resources team now manages more than 16,000 acres of mostly forested hills. By preserving open space in the forest, the once near deforested highlands ecosystems are returning to good condition. Our military reservation serves as a connector of open space between 3 state parks. That's Bear Mountain State Park, Harriman State Park, and the Hudson Highlands State Park, and a forest preserve, the Black Rock Forest Preserve. This connectivity makes for an area of forest larger than a forest preserve that was once proposed for the region in the early 1900s.
Okay, are there any amphibian or reptile projects that you'd like to highlight to the DoD PARC network?
Sure. One thing that makes West Point a little bit different from other installations is we are an academic environment, right? We're a military academy with over 4,000 college students. And so I approach reptile and amphibian projects like an academic would. So my main effort is an acoustic survey of amphibians in wetland habitats here on post. But I'll also highlight some projects that our natural resources team has done. They're working on several herp-related projects. They regularly survey for threatened and endangered species. An ongoing project that they have uses an environmental DNA approach to determine occupancy by rare, threatened, and endangered turtles. They also have an active role in monitoring and protecting rattlesnakes and copperheads, 2 venomous species that normally occur in the highlands ecosystem. They do this by restricting access from known habitats to include dens, which are particularly endangered when people find out about them in other places. They have an active role in educating cadets and the public about these species. And they recently participated in the snake fungal disease survey. So they collected and submitted samples of snakes of various species to include both of the venomous species during that survey of our military reservation.
And what's the purpose of this project?
Well, the purpose of my project is an acoustic ecology project that listens for frogs and toads, and it grew out of a project in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers and Cornell University, where we were surveying for Atlantic coast leopard frogs. That's Lithobates coffididae. This species was recently described from other leopard frog populations in southern New York. They are found throughout southern New York, New Jersey, and northern Delaware. And the boundaries of this population is largely unknown, but it has a cryptic nature. It's hard to find, and when you find it, it's hard to discern from other similar species. but their call is distinct from other frogs. So we used a passive acoustics approach. That is, we put out recorders in the wetlands to listen during the times when the frogs are chorusing. And we do this at various locations to try and identify wetland habitats that they are using.
Nice. And how long has this project been going on?
The earliest survey of vernal ponds that I've found is back in 1993. Our own natural resources team was surveying, and then they contracted a local ecologist named Spider Barber, who surveyed vernal ponds in 1997 and 98. He was using wood frogs and spotted salamanders as indicators of vernal ponds. These are temporary habitats that they use for breeding. I personally started monitoring these wetlands in 2019. I used the passive acoustics approach and was only minimally impacted by COVID-19. So I have now 5 years of continuous survey.
Okay, and so what sort of results have you gotten?
Well, I've recorded both vernal ponds and permanent lakes and ponds. We found all of the species we expected to find, so that's in the Hudson Valley: spring peepers, wood frogs, pickerel frogs, gray tree frogs, bullfrogs, green frogs, as well as American toads and Fowler's toads. We didn't find any of the species that are present in the region but not recently observed at West Point. That includes the Atlantic coast leopard frog, the northern cricket frog, and the eastern spadefoot toads. The northern cricket frog is New York State endangered, and it is found in lakes not far from West Point, but we haven't seen it on our property.
And so how does this project support the Natural Resources Management Plan?
Under Executive Order 11,990, the Garrison West Point, like all federal agencies, must minimize significant actions that contribute to loss or degradation of wetlands, and that action can be initiated to enhance their natural value. So by monitoring for wood frogs and spring peepers and connecting that to other species that use vernal ponds like spotted salamanders, we're identifying potentially vulnerable wetlands that we can then apply a buffer to in training areas. These vernal ponds are found in all of our training areas, and we can work around them in terms of impacts that training might have on them.
And any benefits to this research beyond the military lands that you're conducting it on?
Yeah, so I work with a team that includes the Army Corps of Engineers and scientists from the K. Lisa Yang Center for Conservation Bioacoustics at Cornell University's Lab of Ornithology. And a larger goal of the project is to develop an acoustic library of amphibian sounds. And eventually, we hope to produce software that can automatically detect amphibians in real time, similar to apps that you might have on your phone like Merlin or software like BirdNet when connected to remotely monitoring microphones could potentially deliver results right to your desk.
Any challenges that you encountered while you were working on this project?
Yeah, with a reservation and main post that's more than 16,000 acres and it spans both sides of the Hudson River, if we were to use an active acoustic survey following the North American Amphibian Monitoring Program, it would just be logistically impossible. We were talking about miles of road to travel in places that are inaccessible. Military reservation, we have steep roads that are intended for tactical vehicles that are accessed from a locked gate. It would be a challenge to simultaneously monitoring as many wetlands as we have across a large elevation gradient without using the acoustic recorders that we employ. And these devices are getting smaller. They have large memory capacity and can be programmed to turn on and off on a predetermined schedule. So one person or a small team of people can deploy these and easily monitor a massive, mostly inaccessible space.
All right. And so what's been the most exciting or interesting thing that you've encountered while you've been working on this project?
I presented some of my research at the joint meeting of ichthyologists and herpetologists in Spokane, Washington last year. By monitoring vernal ponds that range in elevation from sea level to 1,400 feet above sea level, and these are wetlands that are within a mile straight line distance from one another, we see up to a 2-week delay in the onset of breeding for wood frogs and spring peepers. the higher elevation environment is significantly colder on the same day, and the thermal cue to move to vernal ponds arrives later for these populations at high elevation. Air temperature at a central location like our main post weather station only predicts onset of activity at a similar elevation. And so this knowledge saves time and energy when determining which ponds to monitor in person to pick up more specific breeding activity for non-acoustic species like spotted salamanders, and to do egg mass checks.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, West Point is an undergraduate institution. We have about 4,000 students here. Have you gotten any of the cadets here at West Point involved in this research?
I do. So every year I have a research assistant. They're doing an independent study, and so they're gaining college credit. And a lot of that has to do with listening to hours and hours of recordings of frogs and toads singing from the woods. And so part of that led to the idea of automating this analysis using software and making something similar to Merlin or BirdNet. But it's a great opportunity for them to get out and use the military training lands during a time of the year when they wouldn't normally be out there, and to gain an appreciation for the natural ecosystems of this region.
When you first started describing that, I was picturing like this big table full of cadets listening to frog calls for like hours on end.
Yeah, no, it's just some of them can do it simultaneous to studying. So I had a cadet, now Lieutenant Nate Buss, who was able to simultaneously listen to frog sounds and do his organic chemistry homework.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So he was annotating minute by minute on these. And so over time, I've come up with, I'll say, shortcuts for using visual cues when listening so that you don't have to listen to every minute. But he was the first cadet to work on it, and was dedicated to it and had the capacity to multitask.
Thank you for listening to the DoD PARC podcast. We hope you enjoyed learning about the exceptional work the United States Military Academy is doing in support of herpetofaunal conservation.